The chamber was vast, carved from polished stone brought from worlds long forgotten, a place where empires argued not with blades but with words that shaped destinies. Delegates filled their platforms, their voices layered in a dozen dialects, resonating with arrogance refined over centuries. They had grown accustomed to domination, to deciding the fate of weaker civilizations without resistance. Today was no different in their eyes. A small, relatively young species from the outer spiral had suffered a raid, and the council gathered to debate whether punishment had been justified. The names of the dominant powers carried weight like gravestones. They did not bother to disguise their disdain for the humans of Sol. To them, Earth was a frontier world, barely past its tribal squabbles, stumbling into star flight only because others had allowed it. The idea that its people might demand recognition or respect was laughable. One voice after another spoke of order, of peace maintained through strength, of discipline meted out against the unruly. They framed the raid as a necessity, a lesson to ensure compliance. Not one spoke of the billions who had screamed beneath fire that fell from orbit. In the shadows of the gallery, whispers carried freely. Laughter rang at the thought of humans, daring to challenge council decisions. Comparisons to past species destroyed for their insolence were shared like jokes. For them, this was another hearing, another affirmation of power. The suffering of one world mattered little against the endless span of the galaxy. It was the old way, the only way they had ever known, might carved laws, and the weak endured them. When the summons was sent to Sol, the chamber expected groveling. They anticipated tears, pleas for mercy, an apology for daring to resist. That was the script countless races had followed before, begging their betters for survival, offering tribute in exchange for peace. The Council had no reason to believe humanity would act differently. After all, Earth had been slow to embrace its place among the stars. Its representatives often remained silent in Council debates, observing rather than shaping them. To the other empires, humans seemed provincial, cautious, irrelevant. The air shifted when the delegation entered. No fanfare preceded them, no display of wealth or power, no shimmering banners to catch the light. Only a handful of officers, uniformed simple, practical, free of gilded ornament. At their center walked the general. His posture held no trace of bowing subservience, no fear of the predators that filled the room. His face betrayed nothing, either rage nor desperation, only the calm restraint of someone who understood exactly where he stood and exactly what had been done to his people. The alien delegates noted this silence and mistook it for weakness. They believed humans had come to accept judgment, to plead for leniency. They failed to notice how the general's eyes lingered on each species present, measuring them with quiet intensity. They failed to grasp that behind his stillness was not submission, but the deliberate patience of a predator waiting for the moment to strike. The council leader opened with practiced condescension, welcoming humanity into the circle of order, and reminding them of their place in galactic society. His voice dripped with certainty that Earth's delegation would fold as so many others had. Accusations flowed, expansion without permission, arrogance in refusing to yield when disciplined, reckless defiance against rightful authority. Every charge delivered was meant to remind the humans of their insignificance, to grind them into silence under the weight of history. Throughout it all, the general did not move. His subordinates remained stone-faced, their silence louder than any protest. The spectacle frustrated some representatives, who had expected tears or at least anger. Instead, they faced a wall of stillness that unsettled them more than shouting would have. For the first time in the chamber's long memory, it was not the accused who seemed small. That quietness became the sharpest weapon of the day. Every word spoken by the counselors reverberated against an absence they could not name. It was not weakness, not resignation, it was a silence that pressed back, a silence that unsettled even the most arrogant delegates. The chamber, so often filled with unchecked voices, began to falter as the weight of human stillness settled over it. The raid was supposed to be a message, a reminder that resistance was futile. Instead, the raid had summoned a response no empire had expected. The council had gathered to judge, to scold, to demand obedience. Yet in that moment, it was not humanity that seemed on trial. It was the council itself, their arrogance mirrored back at them in the unflinching gaze of a people they had dismissed as fragile. By the time the accusations finished, the room no longer carried laughter. Whispers stilled. The humans had not yet spoken a single word, but already, the balance inside the chamber had begun to tilt. Something ancient and instinctive stirred in every delegate as they realized the truth. Silence was not surrender. It was the sound of judgment waiting to be delivered. The accusations began with the certainty of those who believed their words alone shaped reality. The empire responsible for the strike spoke first, its delegate towering, armored in symbols of conquest. He declared the raid a corrective action, not an act of war. According to him, humanity had strayed into restricted sectors, meddled where they had no authority, and thus required discipline. His voice carried the arrogance of one who had delivered such statements countless times, confident the verdict would pass unchallenged. Other species echoed him, layering condemnation upon condemnation. They spoke of humans as reckless explorers, destabilizing fragile balances by pushing into territories beyond their assigned sphere. They insisted the raid had been restrained, merciful even, intended only as warning. Casualties were dismissed as unfortunate byproducts, regrettable but irrelevant in the grander scheme. The chamber filled with agreement, the story solidifying before the eyes of all present. Earth had invited punishment, and punishment had been just. Yet beneath the surface of that chorus of voices was an unease none admitted. The images of burning cities, of shattered fleets, had spread farther than the Empire intended. Billions of deaths were not so easily disguised. Some among the council shifted uncomfortably as they listened, though they said nothing, unwilling to challenge the dominant narrative openly. For centuries, fear had been their leash. Today, that leash felt tighter. The human delegation listened without a word. Their silence stretched across each accusation, across each dismissal of lives lost. It was not the silence of shame, nor the quiet of resignation. It was the steady calm of a blade drawn but not yet swung. The general's hands remained folded, his face immovable, while alien voices painted his people as agitators deserving of chastisement. When he finally rose, the chamber stilled. The motion itself was unremarkable, yet every gaze followed him instinctively, as though gravity itself shifted. His words came not as a shout but as measured syllables, each one weighted more heavily than the torrent of accusations that had preceded them. "You attacked our home?" The statement was so stark, so stripped of embellishment, that it carved silence across the chamber. The councillors blinked, stunned not by volume but by the unshakable conviction beneath the words. For the first time in the hearing, the grand chamber did not echo with rebuttals or self-assured proclamations. The general let the silence linger, ensuring that phrase rooted itself in every mind present. Laughter broke it. A delegate from the southern arm chuckled, mocking the simplicity of the human's claim. Others followed, amused that such primitive sentiment could be offered in a hall of logic and law. To them, the phrase was an outburst of emotion, not an argument worthy of response. Their derision spread like wildfire, masking the faint tremor that had rippled through them at the initial delivery. The general did not flinch. He repeated nothing. He did not meet mockery with anger, nor did he retreat. Instead, his voice cut through their noise with the calm finality of judgment. He explained that Earth was not a frontier outpost, not an expendable colony, not a bargaining chip in the games of empires. It was the cradle of his people, the axis of their identity, the soil from which all their strength grew. Striking Earth was not a lesson to humanity. It was an attack upon humanity itself. His gaze swept the assembly, steady and piercing. The weight of it drew silence once more, for each delegate felt, in some deep instinct, that his words carried no exaggeration. Where their species treated homeworlds as mere capitals, centers to be abandoned if necessary, humanity's bond was different. The general made clear that there existed no separation between Earth and its people. To threaten one was to summon all. The chamber shifted uneasily. The empire that had led the raid leaned forward, dismissive still, but its voice faltered when no chorus rose to support it. The silence spreading through the council was no longer that of indulgence but of doubt, a dawning recognition that the humans were not pleading, not bargaining. They were declaring. The general's words lingered long after he sat again. Short, sharp, unyielding, they clashed against centuries of precedent. Delegates who had entered the chamber amused at the thought of chastising another primitive world now sat with an unfamiliar sensation gnawing at them. It was not guilt. It was not sympathy. It was the faint, primal realization that perhaps this species was not what they believed. No further arguments from the Empire carried the same force. Their rhetoric rang hollow, their certainties thinner, as though the simple declaration had stripped away their armor. The humans had spoken but once, and yet the entire council now measured their words with caution. The phrase resounded in the quiet that followed, undeniable in its simplicity. "You attacked our home." Nothing else needed to be said. The stillness in the chamber stretched, broken only when the general rose once more. His voice carried the same measured control, yet the tone shifted from accusation to revelation. The council had framed humanity as fragile, yet every sentence dismantled that illusion with precision. He spoke of how the strike had not crippled Earth but forged unity unlike anything the galaxy had witnessed. The first hours after the bombardment, he explained, saw rival governments cast aside centuries of division. Nations that had bickered over borders moved as one, their flags lowered beneath a single banner. Industries once driven by profit retooled overnight into engines of survival. Production lines that built commerce vessels now forged warships, aircraft, and weapons in unbroken cycles. Populations volunteered en masse, not conscripted but compelled by a shared oath. No more cities would burn unanswered. The general detailed not only unity but adaptation. He described how humanity had taken technology once kept secret in laboratories and deployed it within days. Prototypes became operational weapons before the ash had cooled. Strategies designed for hypothetical wars were enacted without hesitation. Fields of study that once advanced cautiously accelerated with ruthless focus. Every strike against Earth had accelerated human innovation, and the results were already visible. He spoke of soldiers born into climates ranging from deserts to tundras, trained in jungles, mountains, oceans. This diversity had created fighters prepared for extremes no other species endured. When placed on alien battlefields, they did not falter, they adapted. Where others required generations to adjust, humans adjusted within hours. That adaptability was not learned but woven into their history, a survival instinct honed through millennia of hardship. The general's words shifted to the present, unveiling what had already begun. He named outposts along the raiders' borders reduced to ruins, supply convoys ambushed and destroyed, warships hunted in systems once thought secure. Every line of retreat, every safe harbor, was under threat from forces the Council had dismissed as insignificant. The Empire responsible for the attack had expected scattered resistance. Instead, it faced coordinated strikes that outpaced its ability to respond. A projection illuminated the chamber. It was not elaborate, only a map marked with points of fire. Each point represented a defeat inflicted in the weeks since Earth's bombardment. They were not isolated skirmishes but a spreading chain, a pattern too deliberate to be chance. The image said what the general did not need to: momentum had shifted, and it was irreversible. He spoke of fleet doctrine. Human warships were not elegant or vast compared to the leviathans of ancient empires, but their strength lay in endurance. Designed to withstand failure, built to be repaired with whatever materials lay at hand, they endured punishment that crippled others. Human crews did not retreat when damaged. They improvised, adapted, and struck back. A single vessel, crippled by superior firepower, had already gutted an enemy battleship with tactics no computer predicted. Then he spoke of psychology. Where other armies fought for conquest or survival of empire, humans fought with the knowledge that their home had been struck. That knowledge burned hotter than vengeance. It forged resolve beyond calculation. Defeat was not an option entertained in their minds. Extinction had been a shadow across their history, and they had survived every brush with it. Now, that same resilience was turned outward. The councillors shifted, some visibly disturbed. What they had dismissed as sentiment was revealed as strategy, what they had considered weakness now reframed as an unmatched strength. The Empire's delegate attempted to interject, but his voice faltered against the growing realization spreading through the chamber. The general concluded not with threats but with certainty. Humanity, he said, had already altered the balance of power. The raid intended to humble them had instead awakened a force that could not be contained. No empire, however vast, could erase a species that bound itself so completely to the defense of its origin. What had begun as punishment would end as transformation, for both the attackers and the galaxy itself. The chamber sat in silence again, but this silence was different. It was not confusion or mockery now. It was recognition that a miscalculation had been made, one so severe it could not be undone. The general's voice hardened, carrying none of the courtesy that had framed his earlier words. He spoke of philosophy, not conquest, drawing a clear line between humanity and the empires seated before him. War was not humanity's first choice, he said. They had always sought coexistence, sometimes clumsily, sometimes naively, but never without intent. Yet the moment Earth was struck, coexistence ceased to be an option. There was no treaty, no mediation, no council ruling that could erase the images of burning cities or the cries of the dead. Once their home was violated, the outcome had already been written. The council bristled when he dismissed their authority outright. Their laws, their rituals, their claims to universal order meant nothing to humanity. Negotiation was not denied but declared irrelevant, for there could be no peace imposed upon a species that had seen its birthplace turned into a battlefield. The general stated it plainly: Earth was sacred, and no council decree could overwrite that truth. He spoke then of history, not as boast but as explanation. Earth's soil bore scars of countless wars, civil conflicts, invasions, and disasters. Each time, humans had risen from the rubble stronger than before. They were a species conditioned not by triumph, but by endurance, tested repeatedly by flames that would have extinguished weaker peoples. That cycle of destruction and renewal had carved into them a reflex. When struck, they did not submit. They rebuilt, adapted, and struck harder in return. The chamber heard this not as myth but as testimony. Humanity's survival was not theoretical, it was proven across ages. The general's words turned to doctrine, laying bare the principle guiding their response. Humanity did not conquer for empire. They sought no thrones of domination, no sprawling territories governed by fear. Instead, they erased threats. Those who raised their hand against Earth were marked not for negotiation but for removal. The logic was brutal yet simple: a danger eliminated could never rise again. To humanity, that clarity was not cruelty but necessity. Whispers filled the chamber as the meaning settled in. Empires accustomed to endless rivalries and shifting alliances realized they faced something alien to them, a power that would not be distracted, bribed, or deterred. Humanity did not care for balance of power or council politics. Their focus was absolute. They would not stop until the hand that struck Earth was broken beyond repair. The general's gaze swept across the assembly, and species that had prided themselves on fearlessness lowered their eyes. He spoke of a transformation already underway, how grief had hardened into resolve, how vengeance had been forged into unity. Where others might fracture under pressure, humanity had fused. Every resource, every mind, every hand was turned toward one singular purpose. That unity was not temporary. It was permanent so long as their home remained threatened. The empire that had ordered the strike began to protest, insisting humanity exaggerated, that retaliation could not withstand the weight of a galactic power. But their words carried no conviction. Reports already circulating contradicted their bravado. Worlds along their border whispered of human incursions, of fleets appearing where no fleets should be, of stations falling silent without warning. The Empire's strength was not infinite, and the general knew it. He pressed the truth further. Humanity was not seeking territory, so there was nothing to seize back in negotiations. They were not bargaining for status within the Council, so there was nothing to offer in compromise. Their path was one-directional, toward the eradication of those who had dared to strike their home. That was the doctrine they lived by, and it would not bend. The chamber's atmosphere thickened as the weight of inevitability pressed upon it. Delegates who had mocked humanity now sat in silence, some calculating whether alliance might be wiser than opposition, others realizing too late the danger they had ignored. The general had not shouted, had not threatened, but his words carried the certainty of a verdict already sealed. The speech ended not with flourish but with a statement so sharp it cut through every layer of arrogance remaining in the room. Humanity did not need to be feared because of numbers or fleets or weapons. They needed to be feared because once their home was attacked, they became unstoppable. That was not pride. That was fact. The chamber understood then what the Empire had truly awakened. They had not chastised a primitive species. They had roused a force that would never forgive, never forget, and never stop until its enemies were ash. The general rose one final time, and every delegate felt the weight of inevitability settle upon them. His words were not framed as warnings but as conclusions already unfolding. The attack on Earth had not been a moment in history to be debated. It had been a line crossed that could never be undone. Humanity's course was fixed, and nothing in the chamber could alter it. You didn't strike a colony. You didn't ambush a fleet. You attacked our home. That is why you will lose. The declaration was quiet, but its gravity bent the room into silence. For centuries, the Council had believed themselves arbiters of destiny, yet in that instant, they understood their laws had no power over this species. The authority they wielded so effortlessly against others shattered against a truth deeper than politics. A people bound to their birthplace would fight until no enemy remained standing. Reports began to arrive even as the words hung in the air. Couriers delivered data streams of fleets collapsing along the raiders' border, strongholds once thought impenetrable falling in rapid succession, convoys vanishing without trace. It was not the measured progress of a campaign but the relentless advance of a force that had abandoned hesitation. Every world that had mocked Earth now saw the fire spreading, and the realization burned sharper than any threat spoken in the chamber. Delegates whispered to aides, calculations shifting. Empires that had sneered at humanity only hours before now contemplated the cost of enmity. The choice was stark: resist a people who had declared themselves unyielding, or step aside and let their fury consume its target. Some already considered approaches to Earth, not to dominate but to offer alliance. Better to stand beside such a species than to stand in their path. The general made no appeal for allies. He did not ask for support, recognition, or sympathy. Humanity required none of it. His message was not recruitment but testimony: Earth would not rest until justice was delivered. Whether others joined or watched from the shadows, the outcome remained unchanged. He described what drove them, not as vengeance alone but as principle. Humanity did not fight to expand, nor to rule, nor to carve territory. They fought so no hand would ever again believe it safe to strike their world. That doctrine was final. The galaxy had mistaken restraint for weakness, silence for submission. Now it would learn that restraint was choice, and once withdrawn, there was no barrier to what humanity would unleash. The Empire's delegate, pale and trembling now, tried to salvage dignity with threats of overwhelming retaliation. But his voice faltered beneath the weight of unfolding reality. Entire sectors were already slipping from their control. Populations long oppressed now saw hope in the rise of a species that fought without fear. Rebellions flared where before only despair had reigned. Humanity had not sought to inspire them, but their defiance ignited sparks across the Empire's dominion. The chamber understood then that the war was no longer confined to Earth. By daring to burn a single planet, the Empire had created a contagion of resistance, one carried forward by humanity's refusal to bow. The legend was already writing itself: a world attacked, a species unified, an empire collapsing beneath the fury of those once dismissed as primitive. The general's final words carried no embellishment. He promised no conquest, claimed no thrones, demanded no reparations. He offered only certainty. Humanity would endure, humanity would strike, and humanity would finish what had been forced upon them. When the last enemy stronghold lay in ruins, only then would they speak of peace. Not before. Never before. The chamber sat frozen. Some species lowered their eyes in shame, others in fear, but all recognized the shift. A new truth had entered the galaxy, one that no decree could erase. Humanity could not be threatened without consequence. Earth was not merely another world. It was a force that had shaped a people who would never yield once their home was attacked. Outside the council, messages spread like wildfire. Civilizations across the spiral repeated the words, not with ridicule now but with awe. Humanity's strength was no longer questioned. It was feared, respected, and, by some, quietly admired. The story traveled faster than fleets, embedding itself in every corridor of power, the day the galaxy learned what it meant to strike at Earth. In the end, silence reclaimed the chamber. Not the silence of mockery, nor the silence of doubt, but the silence of inevitability. The general had spoken. Humanity had chosen. And the galaxy would never forget what followed.